looking at the intro. Good evening, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thin in numbers and so interesting. I couldn't help but overhear your comment just then, sir, about people just want the messages. Do you know what? There is so. I'm not talking at you, and I'm not disparaging for you because I understand that sentiment very much. Spiritualism has got so much to offer. There is so much, and a very warm welcome to our friends watching us online tonight. Unfortunately, we have degraded into just the message. Come along and, oh, I had a lovely afternoon. I'm not knocking that, it has its place. But there is so much more that we can learn. Not only, we don't talk to the dead talk to us to get us to live this life, to get the best out of this life. So it's nice, nights like this, where we can have wonderful guests. Sorry about tonight's. Wonderful.
Thanks for that.
That's great. It gets better. Wonderful guests. We've got a wealth of information to share with us. Very interactive evenings. Please ask questions. All right. Always, always, always say till you're so bored of hearing it, no question is daft. If you hear something you don't understand, ask. That's the only way we find out. Great delight to welcome a wonder. I don't have favourite mediums. David has got so much knowledge and he's got so much passion for what he does. And that really shines through. So tonight we are talking about spiritual healing. I'm going to leave you in the very capable hands of David Powell. Those of you watching us online at home, if you have any questions, please pop them in the comments box. Those of you in the church, just for your comfort and understanding, people at home can only see the platform, they cannot see you. All right, so if you're in here with somebody you shouldn't be in here with, your secret is safe. Have a wonderful evening.
Brilliant.
David.
Thank you, Laurie. Well, good evening, friends. It is an absolute pleasure, as always, and a joy to be with you here this evening and to have this opportunity, as Laurie said, to basically enter into a discussion. There'll be opportunities to ask questions, and I'll certainly welcome questions. I don't profess to know all the answers, but then that's part of this experience. It's about us each finding our own truth, our own understanding, and then living that to the best of our ability. For those of you who perhaps don't know me or don't know of my background, I'll give you just a 2-minute kind of nutshell history, but I'm not going to kind of dwell on that, and we'll get into the healing stuff. So I've been a platform medium for about the last 14 or so years, serving churches throughout Hampshire, Dorset and the Isle of Wight. But before then, back to about 2005, I started my journey into all of this as a healer. And I've been an approved healing medium with the Spiritualist National Union. Went on to get my CSNU award in healing. Was a deputy leader in a healing group, church-based healing group. And then more recently, I was the healing representative on what was the Southern District Council of the SNU, and that was essentially overseeing the training, the development and the assessment of trainee healers. So that's kind of my background in healing, but I've also been on my own sort of personal healing journey, which I'll talk about again in a nutshell kind of form a little bit later. But I'd like to just start off the talk by touching on another area of passion for me, and that is photography. And for those of you who may know me, I love photography. I love getting out there in nature and taking pictures. And I'd just like to start by introducing you to my camera. You're probably thinking, what on earth is he going on about? This is about spiritual healing, not about photography and cameras. This is the owner's manual that you get when you buy the camera from Nikon, and the one I've got is a D500. And you can probably see by the kind of dimensions of this book, it's about 600 pages long, and it's fairly small print with lots of charts and diagrams. And obviously if you want to operate the camera, that's what you need to kind of study and to digest. But if you want to really move beyond just the understanding of what all the buttons are, you then kind of might progress to something like this, which is a book called Mastering the Nikon D500. And again, as you can see by the size, there's some 700 odd pages with diagrams, photographs, charts and all sorts. So between the two books, and there's other ones you could buy, I'm not doing a sales pitch by the way for Amazon or anything else, but there are other books you could buy. But on approximately, there's 1,000 pages there of information on how to operate this camera. What button to press if you wanted to do this, what not to press if you don't want it to do something else. 1,000 pages of information with photographs, charts and all sorts of other information. But at the end of the day, it is just a camera. It is just a camera that takes pictures. It can't breathe. It hasn't got a heart. It hasn't got the capacity to imagine. It doesn't have memory other than a little memory card that's written digitally. It doesn't eat. It doesn't do any number of things that you do, each and every one of us do, day in and day out. 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and for however many years that we might live. So the question I'd like to put to you right here and now to begin with is, where is your manual? Have you ever read your operating manual on how to operate what is arguably the most complex, the most advanced creation in all of known creation? There is nothing more complex, more advanced than your body, interwoven with its consciousness. If there's 1,000 pages there for just a camera, can you begin to start to imagine how many pages of information you might need on a manual on how to operate the human body? Or begin to appreciate the intelligence behind the creation of you as a human being. You know, we're not talking about 1,000 pages, we're not talking about hundreds of thousands of pages, are we? And what is this thing that you have as a human body? We take so much of it for granted, do we not? Because if I had an apple right here and now, and if I ate that apple, what happens? Well, what happens is that without any conscious volition on my part, my body converts an apple into whether it is blood cells, muscle cells, bone, tissue, hair, whatever. It does that without me having to give any kind of conscious direction. If it becomes too hot in here, my body, without any need on my part to think about it, will adjust, will start mechanisms that will help cool the body. If I drew out a knife now, and if I pulled a knife across my finger, please nobody faints, I'm not going to do this, I'm just saying. But if I did, providing I didn't go too deep and too hard, well, what would happen? What would happen is that within a few minutes, without, again, me having to give any direction, the blood would start to clot clotting agents would be released into the bloodstream that would start to heal that wound. And before you know it, within a matter of days, you could look at my finger and you wouldn't even know there'd been a cut there. That the bodily intelligence, which is part and parcel of this thing that we call a human body, would heal itself. And when we begin to look at this thing called a human body, with that degree of appreciation, that degree of wonder and that degree of awe, we perhaps might see to the extent to which we take this thing for granted. It is a miracle of creation. There is absolutely no doubt about that. And yet largely, what do we do with this miracle of creation? Do we nurture it? Do we honour it? Do we, I say, worship it? And I don't mean, selfies and all that kind of stuff. By and large, we don't, do we? We kind of tend to abuse this thing, this miracle of creation. How do we abuse it? We abuse it by putting things, consuming things that are not good for us. Red wine, malt whiskey, put my hand up.
Yes, sir.
And any other number of pleasures, foods that we know aren't good for us. We kind of consume this. We don't exercise to the degree that we do. And then there comes that point in time when the body kind of gives us a bit of a kick. And it says, hang on a minute, we've gone kind of too far. And we've been on a little bit of a journey without realizing it. We've journeyed from the place of being in a state of wellness, in a state of wholeness, in a state of harmony, into a state of disharmony. And the suggestion I'd like to put to you is that there are exceptions, of course, but by and large, leaving aside infections, leaving aside any hereditary conditions, most of disease arises purely and simply from that, from dis-ease, from a lack of harmony within the body. And that lack of harmony within the body manifests itself then in physical disease. So you might be asking that question, well, why? How do I move from this state of wellness into a state of disharmony? Because one thing we do know for sure is that the natural condition of the body, what that intelligence is working for, is what we call homeostasis, is for a natural steady state. That's our natural state of being, to be in harmony. But we all know, if you had to kind of plot on a scale right here and now, whether you want to talk about today, whether you want to talk about the last week or the last month, the last year or the last 10 years, if you had to put a point, a marker on the scale of where you feel you've been in terms of harmony within your body, within your mind, I believe most people would have a struggle getting up towards the top end of the scale. And then, as I say, we become surprised when we experience an episode of ill health. I can speak from my own personal experience as a healer, and as I mentioned before, having been on my own kind of healing journey, as it were. At the age of 53, I had a heart attack, completely out of the blue, one Sunday morning, sat in bed having a cup of tea and thought, oh, I don't feel so good. And within half an hour, an ambulance crew were there wheeling me off to hospital, completely out of the blue. Never smoked, never been overweight, been fit and active. Completely caught me kind of by surprise. I then spent 6 weeks in hospital, whilst they were working out what was going on with me, because it was apparent to them that there was more than just a heart attack. I had shadows on my lungs which they didn't know what were. And to cut a long story short, in the early part of the new year in 2014, they diagnosed me with a incurable underlying autoimmune disorder. And they say the autoimmune disorder had most likely triggered the heart attack. So they don't know what causes this condition, is what they were telling me. They knew how to treat it, which was very fortunate, because until the advent of steroid medication, your sort of survival time with this condition without treatment was about 8 months. So I was very pleased that they had the right kind of medication to be able to treat it. But what this experience kind of brought to my understanding and my awareness, if I was true to my own understanding, if I was true to my own philosophy, I could see within the pattern of my thoughts the seeds for not only the autoimmune condition, but also why I would have had a heart attack. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying to you that at any point in my history I kind of sat down and consciously thought, do you know what, I would be up for a heart attack, or I would be up for an autoimmune disease. Nobody does. Nobody sits down and thinks to themselves, I wouldn't mind having this, I wouldn't mind having that. But if we go back to the analogy of the manuals, we are gifted with these miracles of creation. We don't really have the first idea from a knowledge base on how to navigate through life with this body. We learn very much by trial and error. We all went to school, we've all been through some level of education, but that education largely, if you think about it, was an accumulation of knowledge, was an accumulation of facts. We know what happened in the history in whatever particular time. We might have learned to speak a language. But did anybody actually sit down and say to you, this is how to use the mind? This is the consequences. If you use your mind, if you entertain a certain pattern of thought, this is what's likely to happen. Nobody told me that, and I'm sure my experience is not unique. No one has told us how to effectively operate this most incredible and wonderful thing called a human body. And we've learned by trial and error. And my error, as I look back, was to have fallen into a pattern of thought and a pattern of being where I was essentially in my own mind at war with myself. Lo and behold, what did I then manifest within my body? A condition which mirrored largely my pattern of thought. Being at war with myself, my immune system, that very thing which is designed to protect us, was basically on the offensive within my own body. So, if we can use another analogy, if we can liken our mind to a little bit like a computer, and we all know to make an input into a computer we have a keyboard, and the computer doesn't really care. If you want to put your finger on the letter K and keep it there, it will faithfully reproduce the letter K continuously. Doesn't care. Or M, or N, or R, or S, or whatever. It doesn't matter. And I believe, in my experience, our mind is largely like that. It's our faithful servant in the sense that if we want to entertain and hold a particular pattern of thought, it will serve us. We will continue to hold that thought. But just in the same way as if we keep our finger on letter K on the keyboard, and that faithfully reproduces K, 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 and so on and such forth, if we continue to hold a pattern of thought within our mind, that will too faithfully be manifested. Now, I know at this point I may have started to lose some of you, because some of you may be thinking, well, thoughts are thoughts. Thoughts are those things that kind of spontaneously arise in my mind. As long as they're in my mind, they're not going anywhere, they don't have power, they don't have energy, they don't have potential. And what I would like to say to you is that nothing could be further from the truth. That thoughts are energy, have power, have potential. And we can illustrate this very, very simply, very, very easily. I appreciate what Lawrence said about the camera facing this way and not that way, but is anybody brave enough to acknowledge here that they blush easily? Does anybody blush? Yeah? Could I pick on you? Is that all right? Yeah? All right. If I was to come down to you now and get on bended knee and profess my undying love for you and say I would drink your bathwater daily, I would do anything to be at your command, and it would be my pleasure to serve your whatever your whim. Is there a start of a blush going?
Yes, it's in there.
Thank you.
Please
So
note, he didn't mean that, all right?
Yeah. It's just an experiment. Okay. So you're happy to sort of concede that you've blushed?
Yes,
Yeah. We
absolutely.
won't kind of pull you up on platform to prove the point,
I know.
but
I
yeah.
know we should have said that to Ted.
All right, but thank you. Let's just analyse what's just happened there in that moment. I've expressed a few thoughts, and those thoughts have been clothed in the form of words. And within a matter of milliseconds, sorry, we forgot your name again.
So,
Sue's mind has converted those sounds that I made, those words, has given meaning and interpretation to them, and that interpretation has led to her bloodstream being flooded with neurotransmitters, which have gone to the small capillaries in her cheeks and caused them to dilate, causing that reddening and that flush. So just a few thoughts expressed in that way, and I've changed the physiology of Sue's body. Now, if you do any kind of research into neurosciences and what have you, I've seen it said that neuroscientists will say that on average we have between 60 and 80,000 thoughts a day. 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day. So if I've changed Sue's physiology by just expressing 3 or 4 thoughts, and I've caused that change in her body, let's just say Sue is holding on to a pattern of thought that she's repeating maybe 20,000 times a day, unconsciously, unknowingly, and is repeating that over the course of, say, 5 or 10 years. Now, if I've been able to cause dilation in the capillaries in Sue's cheeks, is it possible that an alternative line of thought could cause a restriction in blood vessels? It doesn't seem that much of a stretch, does it? So can we begin to see the power and the potential of our thoughts? There's also been studies done looking at the power of thought directed in the way of prayer. And one particular case study came to mind. There were a group of patients in Japan who'd all had heart attack and cardiology issues. And they were divided into 2 groups. They weren't told this, but they were divided into 2 groups. And a prayer group in America were assigned one group, and they sent absent healing prayers for this group of patients. But the other group didn't know, weren't told, weren't prayed for. they then did long-term studies on the outcomes of the two groups of patients. And I know you're already ahead of the curve. You know what the outcome was, won't you? That the group of patients who were prayed for all had better outcomes than the ones who weren't. So we can see the power and the potential that thought has when it's directed with an intention, whether that be positive or whether that be negative. Clearly, in this instance, it was for a positive outcome. And at this particular point, we can think very clearly about the, within SNU spiritualism, we talk about the fifth principle, personal responsibility. When we start to actually unpick what personal responsibility means, the consequences and the implications of that are hugely profound. We think about personal responsibility first and foremost to ourself. To what degree am I prepared to acknowledge that I am personally responsible for my state of being? Because the tendency, is it not, to say, well, if only they wouldn't do this, if only that was like that, if only this could be different, then I'd be okay. But that then is kind of shifting responsibility, isn't it? That's then expecting the world and everybody else out there to conform to how we want, how we need things to be okay. You've probably already worked out that the world doesn't work that way, which is why so many of us are having such a tough time of life, because we've held on to this belief that if only this would be like that, I'd be okay. But the true pathway to understanding and to be free from that is to come into that realization that the responsibility for being okay is with us first and foremost, and in truth only with us. That's the challenge, that's the opportunity that this life is affording us. So what I'd like to suggest to you is that healing is a return to harmony, is a return to balance. That is our natural state of being. But we inadvertently, through misunderstanding, through ignorance, through misdirection, unconsciously use our mind in ways which don't serve us well. And that then becomes manifest, may become manifest as disease, as disharmony within the body. And when that presents itself, our natural response is to want to restore ourselves back to healing, back to harmony, back to a state of balance, which is where healing comes in. And you'll know within spiritualism there has been a long, vast history of spiritual healing within spiritualism. Some of the recent greats, Harry Edwards, probably one of the most known and regarded spiritual healers within spiritualism. If you haven't read about him and his work, then I encourage you to go off and do so. It is incredible. And within spiritualism and within spiritual healing, what we understand is that is happening is that there is a transference, if you like, of energy from the spirit world through the healer to the patient. From spirit, through spirit, to spirit. And I'm sure probably most of you have experienced healing or are healers yourself, and it is usually done through what we call contact healing, placement of hands, typically on the shoulders, on the back. And the healer is an instrument for that power, in the same way as a platform medium is an instrument for that power. And it is simply just a different application, if you like, of that intelligence, that power. I would like to take that model a little bit further and suggest that yes, there may well be that transference of energy as has been described, but there is also at work this intelligence within the body that we've already identified, that we've already discussed. And in my model, in my way of understanding, that isn't passive. It may be in a state where it's depleted. It may be in a state where it is out of balance and is not firing, as it were, on all four cylinders. And perhaps the act of healing, notwithstanding what may be taking place on a spiritual level, but the act of healing, the intervention of a healer, is in some way a catalyst, is a primer, is refocusing, re-energizing, recentering that person's capacity to heal themselves. Because we've already established, we've already proven, I hope, that this body knows how to look after itself, knows how to heal itself. So, that being the case, how do we how do we help ourselves, as it were, to heal, to be healed? Well, first and foremost, I would suggest that we need to develop a degree of mindfulness. We need to develop a degree of awareness of our pattern of thought. We need to be aware sufficiently that when we start to go down a pattern of thought which we've already identified isn't helpful, isn't serving us, that we have sufficient awareness to kind of pull ourselves up and say, I'm not going there, I'm not going down that pattern of thought, and to stop and to go in a different direction. And in the degree to which we're able to do that, we then start to sow seeds for what we want, as opposed to what we don't want. And that lesson was brought home very evidently to me within my own personal healing journey. As I said, when I was diagnosed with this condition, I was told it was incurable, that there'd be support groups available if I wanted to join them. This was the medication regime and all the rest of it. And whether I was kind of encouraged and inspired by spirit, I don't know, but my first decision was I wasn't going to be involved in any support group. Because to me, in my way of thinking, and we're all different, so I'm not prescribing this as one solution fits everybody, that identifying with the very thing that I didn't want to have would not be helpful to me. I've never read the information leaflet they give you with all the medication, because I didn't want to admit into my mind the very things that I didn't want to have. I've always regarded the medication that they gave me on the same kind of terms of I was having Smarties, sweets. I didn't invest my belief in them as being something which was going to be harmful or damaging to me. And I even went as far as holding the belief that I'd been misdiagnosed, that somewhere along the line that this could not be happening to me. They must have got my notes mixed up with somebody else. So in my mind, I did not have the condition that they told me that I did have. Now you might call that denial, I don't know. But whatever it was, it worked. In the sense that for 6 or 7 years, yes, I had to have immunosuppressants and steroid drugs and all manner of other stuff, chemotherapy. But 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago now, stopped all medication. I got to a point where my body was back into a state of full harmony, and all the blood tests, all the results were showing that there was no active signs of any disease. They couldn't explain it. They said, you're atypical. We'd like to know how it is that you are now in this, condition, free from all of this. What have you been doing? And I thought at that moment, do I tell them? And I thought, yes, of course I am. So I talked to them about the power of visualization. I talked about being conscious of the thoughts that I held. I talked about self-healing practices. I talked about affirmation. And you could just see the kind of, glazed look come over the consultant's face, and they said, oh, so it's all mind over matter, is it? And I said, exactly. And he kind of moved on to the next point on his bullet list of things to talk about. But I've proven to myself that mind over matter is exactly what it is. That our mind, first and foremost, is our best friend or our worst enemy. That, as I said, leaving aside cases of infection and conditions which we, may have inherited, by and large, disease results essentially from wrong thinking. Not intentionally, but through misunderstanding and through falling into a pattern of thought that will then quite naturally manifest itself within the body. And I am now in the condition that I am because I've consciously changed my thoughts. I had that realization that if I manifested that condition within my body through the pattern of thoughts that I held, if I had that power to manifest it, I also had the power to de-manifest it. And that's what my personal journey has been about learning to be conscious of the mind, realizing what pattern of thoughts are helpful and which ones are not, and having that awareness to stop ourselves. We're creatures of habit. We fall into these habits so easily, but to kind of stop yourself at an early point and quite literally say, I'm not going there, and redirect the mind to another direction, which is going to be helpful and productive. So that has been my kind of personal journey. I spoke before about how can we help ourselves with healing. I've shared with you my personal journey because there may be elements of that you can think, well, actually, yeah, I could kind of import that into my own journey. It's for each and every one of us individually to find and to forge, as it were, our own pathway. But you probably don't need me to tell you, but spiritual healing will help. I say that as a healer and having been a patient also. There's no doubt about that. Absent healing, sending prayers will also help. But also being in nature, going for a walk in the forest, going down to the beach. There's any number of studies which have demonstrated the healing potential and the benefits that can be derived from simply being in nature. Our blood pressure lowers, the well-being hormones start flooding the body, we get exercise. So being in nature, exercise, diet, dare I say, and I'm not talking about, just eating, rabbit food, but just exercising, portion control, all things, in moderation. We know about the power of meditation, again, in terms of the beneficial impact that will have on the body, on things like yoga. There are any number of modes of healing out there available to us. But as I said before, it comes down to us as the individual to want to access those means, those avenues of support. And it's a bit like, if someone said to you, you've got to lose weight. You've got to lose weight. You've got to lose half a stone. They can give you all the information in the world about all the health benefits of what losing half a stone would do. They can give you diet plans, they can give you whatever to help you to do that. But you will only lose half a stone, if that's what your target is, if you want to lose half a stone. Nobody can make you lose, half a stone. And one thing I did notice when I was practicing hands-on healing on a regular basis is that people can become invested in their illness. People can become attached to, and it becomes part of them because it's meeting a need in some way, shape or form. And going to a healer week in, week out, year out, to be healed isn't going to work, in my book, in my experience, unless there is first and foremost a desire, decision and wanting on the part of the individual to be healed themselves and to take responsibility for themselves. Otherwise it can be a bit like just going to the cabinet and getting a sticking plaster. It kind of covers things up for a while, but if we're still holding that destructive pattern of thought, then no amount of sticky plasters or tablets or pats on the back or hugs or whatever is going to make us better. So that's the opportunity that's before us. And it comes down to a fundamental choice that we have at the beginning of each and every day. And that fundamental choice is, do I want to be happy? Do I want to be happy today? And you can choose consciously when you wake up in the morning, I'm going to be happy today. And your pattern of thought and your interactions with yourself and other people can be driven on that line. I'm choosing to be happy in my interaction. And in that way, you begin to sow the seeds of well-being within yourself, in your interactions, into your relationships with friends, with other people. But it all starts with that very, very simple question: do you want to be happy? And only you can answer that. If you want to be happy, wonderful. If you choose not to be, that's your choice. But if we go back to personal responsibility, if we're not choosing to be happy and to be healthy and to be whole, then we've got to be okay to accept all that comes with that. But I don't believe that we are fundamentally wanting not to be healthy, not to be happy, because that is our natural state. That is what we are born into in these physical bodies. That's our natural state. That's what our body is working to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Does it not fall on us as the master, as it were, of this being to align our thoughts in such a way as that this creation, this miracle of creation, has all and every opportunity it has through the wonder and the mystery of this earthly life to fulfill itself to its greatest potential. So on that point, I'm going to stop because I've rabbited on for a long time, and I did say there'd be an opportunity for discussion and questions, I should say, if you're expecting me to talk for half an hour about where to put your hands on patients and where not to put your hands, I'm sorry if you were expecting that and have been disappointed, but I took the brief to be a talk about healing in its widest kind of form. So I trust that has given you some food for thought, has maybe provoked you in some way, because if it has, then I'll go home tonight feeling it's kind of a job well done. But if you haven't been provoked and if you don't have any questions, what's going to happen is I'm going to sit down here now and I'm going to ask each one of you a question, because I've got more questions now than what I had when I first came into all this 25 odd years ago. So opening up the floor to any questions. Yeah, Sue.
Where we're talking about the energies, and if we'll go back to some of the experiments that were done on water, where the water was spoken to in a derogatory sense,
Yeah.
or sung to, or whatever, in a beautiful way, and
Yeah.
the different patterns of the ice water. So if a child's growing up and there's all the negative energy around that, that has to be dissolved as well. But sometimes the programming and stuff that goes into children, we don't realise that we're doing it because it's just come down the generations. The programs are in there sometimes and the person doesn't actually know they're there. How do you get to the root of that? Is it something that becomes a revelation when the person's ill? Or they do work on themselves? Yeah. What have you got to say about that?
I totally agree with the point there, Sue. I went through largely the first 40 years of my life, despite growing up in a spiritualist family, I went through the first 40 years of my life oblivious, in blissful ignorance to any concept of thought being anything other than this thing that kind of rattled around inside my head. It was, in my instance, it took I think it was the passing of my own father that was like a turning point. From having had a very passive understanding about spiritualism and mediumship, that seemed to be a turning point to go and explore. And life does seem to have a way. Most of the people I know, I associate with through my mediumship and spiritualism, if you talk to them, most of them have been through some kind of experience where they've been laid bare, as it were, either through a bereavement, through a relationship crisis or a health crisis. And it's sad, but that's the way it seems to be for so many people, that either the body gets to a point where it kind of just says, like, enough, and it forces either some degree of awakening or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, then you can only foresee potentially and you see people like this recurring spiral into ill health. But the point about children and the conditioning, again, I look back, we all as fathers do our best, to be a good father. We've got a grandson now who's coming up 5, and I've watched him grow up with a much greater degree of appreciation and understanding about how best to interact with him. It's not that I was horrible to my own children, but I've got a much better insight now, and it makes you kind of think, well, if I had my time again, I would have done things a little bit differently. But yes, children, they are born into families. There is so much conditioning that goes on at that young age, which sets the pattern of thought, of perception, of those inner values, of the personality. It's all formed in those, early years. And again, in my own experience, I won't bore you with the details, but I can identify an event that took place when I was 18 months old. And I've had to kind of call on different people to piece these bits together. But that event at 18 months old sowed the seeds very, very clearly for the event that I would then have all those years later. A belief system, a pattern of thought was ingrained in my subconscious at that early age, which has been then quietly working away in the background and then came to a head, I say, at the age of 53. As parents, as grandparents, as people who may have a responsibility or an influence towards children, yeah, we need to be hugely careful and hugely mindful as best we are able to ensure that they are being conditioned, but conditioned with love, and to help them as best we are able to have this kind of understanding at an early age. It's one of the things I have done with my own children. Only just today I was emailing my daughter a video link for a talk on how our thoughts and stress in particular can impact in the physical body. So a bit belated, but nonetheless, hopefully helpful.
Maybe people are only ready to hear something like your talk this evening at the right time for them, for it to make any sort of sense.
Yeah.
But at least, and if it doesn't make any sense, it sows the seed, doesn't it, to allow it to germinate.
Absolutely.
I feel we need to do more of that.
Yeah.
For humanity, really.
Yeah.
So.
I have heard, some schools in some parts of the country are having classes on mindfulness and on meditation practices and that kind of thing, but it seems to be very much on a small scale and possibly falling on deaf ears, because if you talk to your average 13, 14-year-olds about the need for mindfulness and all the rest of it, probably rather be kicking a football around or on the iPhone or whatever. Yeah, but there is a desperate need for it, absolutely. Yeah.
How do you know when, because you said something about when you truly want to heal, then you'll heal. You might think you want to heal, but how do you know if you actually really want to? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so you think that you want to heal, but there could be something subconsciously that's holding you from healing. So for instance, with my leg, I had a motorcycle accident 2 years ago, and I want to heal, and I'm doing all the things that I think I should be doing, like hypnosis, all kinds of sort of stuff, to get into some subconscious as well. But I'm just thinking, is there an element, because it hasn't happened yet, is there an element in the subconscious that I don't know about? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think in instances like that, where there's been an injury, that is in a different ballpark to a disease,
Right.
because you didn't, I'm sure you didn't consciously think, having a motorbike accident would be a good thing to do today and breaking my leg.
Well, I do think there was an element of that led up to this event.
Okay.
Thinking about things, I think, I'm not sure, but
Yeah. It all comes back to know thyself,
yeah.
and that's not a cop-out. But me piecing together my own kind of personal journey, my own kind of healing journey, has taken me probably the best part of 20 years to come to the level of understanding and the awareness of where I am today, and putting all the bits of the jigsaw into place. We don't begin to understand the mind. It's many layers. Medical science can't tell you what consciousness is. We can describe, the appearance of it and the functions of it, but medical science can't tell you what consciousness is. There may be something at a deeper level that you may be holding on to. But it wouldn't be for me, or I believe anybody else, to say to you what that is. They may be able to talk with you and help for you to kind of realise if there is something there that you're holding on to. But my first reaction would be to say, in an instance like that, where it's an injury, there is a natural process. The body's going to take time to knit bones or whatever it needs to do. And if you're doing all the things that you say you're doing with exercise and physio and all that kind of stuff, that sounds to be the right kind of approach.
Cool.
Yeah.
Got it.
I don't know if I've answered the question there, but I'm not sure if it is an answerable kind of question.
You
other than
did say something that did kind of resonate, and it was more a case of knowing yourself, if you're doing the right thing or not.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
yeah.
Yeah.
And largely we don't know ourselves.
Yeah.
We don't.
No, I know.
We do not
That's
know
what I'm
ourselves. We kind of look in the mirror and we think, oh yeah, that's me. But do you really know yourself at a deeper level than that? Do you understand what motivates you? Do you understand your fears? Do you understand where they came from? And everything that you know, whether it's about yourself or another person, I'd ask the question, do you really know? Do you really know? Because everything that you believe you know is operating through the faculty of your perception. And your perception is uniquely personal to you. However many people there are in this evening, you'll all go home, and if you had to write down what you saw, what you heard, what you experienced, if there's 20 people in this room, there'd be 20 different versions of what happened. And all of them are right, because you experienced this moment through that set of filters, if you like, which is your personal perspective. And you use that self-same perspective to look at yourself. And let's just say you've got filter X, Y, and Z as part of your perception. And let's just say filter Y is giving you a distorted misrepresentation of another person, or more importantly, yourself. And you're looking at yourself, you're beholding yourself through this filter of perception that is giving you a distorted impression. So let me ask the question again. Do you know yourself? You know the appearance, you know the semblance of you, you have this kind of avatar kind of creation in mind of who you are, who you might appear to be to other people. But, we are many-layered beings in our consciousness. And there is no, in my experience, there is no quick, open the door and discover it. It's like peeling an onion. We have to progressively reveal a greater insight and understanding of what and who we are. And that is all part of that healing journey. As I said, we come into life whole, largely, happy, and in a place of harmony, and it seems that as we go through life, our hold on that degree of harmony can diminish. And we reach a point where it's like crisis, and then it's that journey then to bring ourselves back, hopefully, to a place of wholeness and harmony. We've got time for another question, or are we?
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
A couple of online. There's
Yeah.
a comment from Jen up in Durham. Brilliant talk, David. I so agree with your viewpoint of not accepting to have the illness. She has a similar autoimmune condition But I do not suffer from it. I have lived in spite of it. The symptoms have been kept under control for several years. It's not denial, it's choice.
Absolutely, yeah.
Serena in Germany asks, do you think that healing also increases the strength of a healer in their healing work? She is aware that spirit heals, but does the self-awareness make one a better channel?
Yes, I do. I do believe that in exactly the same way there is a law of gravity that nobody has the option to opt out of, there is a law of giving and receiving. And in the very act of wanting to be of service to another person, to help with their healing, you cannot but attract to you a corresponding power, a force. I was once told when I first started my healing journey, healers want to heal because at some level they recognise they need to be healed themselves. And certainly in my experience that was very true. So I wholly agree that in the act of healing that there is a restorative power that is brought to bear on the healer, and anything that the healer themselves can do to better understand the mechanism of who they are, the agency of that spirit power, how to best utilise and to work in harmony with that, can only lead to a greater manifestation of that power in terms of healing outcome.
Yeah.
But as I said before, you know, we could be the best channel for spirit, but the patient themselves must want to be healed. There's got to be an alignment with that power and that force, and the patient truly, fully, honestly wanting to be healed. Otherwise, what is it? You know, it can be a social kind of interaction, it can be comforting, but if they're not wanting to be healed, no amount of healing, I don't believe, can overcome their own kind of free choice.
I know there's people asking questions about that in their head. This is an unconscious thing, isn't it? We talk about sometimes working with our shadow self, and that's dealing with bits of us actually I don't want to admit to, but I don't really want to say is me, but they are. You know, and it's normally down to things like lack of self-worth, lack of self-love, guilt or things like that, and it's when we start working with those energies and starting to clear those energies, then actually we can see why we're denying ourselves good health. Not consciously.
No.
I'm not saying anybody sits here going, I want to be ill because when I'm ill I get lots of fuss and I'm just a miserable old bugger anyway, so I'm quite happy being ill. If we don't actually believe ourselves that we deserve to be well, that we are whole and good and we try our best, I'm not saying we're all saints, but we try our best, but it's getting down to that level, isn't it, with
Absolutely.
people?
Yeah.
So, well, interesting what you're saying about feeding an illness, because I don't want to be, you know, I have an autoimmune disease.
Yeah.
And I've tried to educate myself about it, but in educating myself about it and finding out that, for example, gluten does not suit my body, because I have Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and most of your immune system's in your gut, so you've got to look after your gut. I then find that certain gluten things can cross-contaminate with calcium, for example, so I started reading up about that, and I'm almost making myself worse because I'm over-educating myself.
Yeah.
And it becomes almost, you become paranoid about, well, if I take that, that's going to happen, and if I don't do that, something else is going to happen. Instead of just being, just ignore it really. It's not ignorance, it's just that it's not adding anything to my life.
No. And it's that, you know, what I call identifying. And I understand that kind of need to want to understand and to read about it, But in the act of doing that, we're then admitting all this stuff into our mind, which can then wreak havoc. I know what I'm saying will go against what, if you go to your GP, that they will tell you, no, this is a good thing to do, and what have you. And I acknowledge, as I said, that what I've spoken about has been very much my personal experience, and I don't offer it as a general prescription. But to my way of thinking, if we identify too strongly with something that, well, whatever it is, we are admitting that it becomes part of our operating thoughts, part of that program that is running in the mind. And if it's not helpful, if it's not serving us, then it's got no place being in the mind.
It becomes obsessive, and the way that you've pitched it tonight with somebody else. I need to listen into your talk tonight, because he also obsesses about his health,
Yeah.
and it's negative.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm only stood up, I'm not trying to rush you
Yeah.
off, I just suddenly had to stand up. Don't panic.
Was there another question? Yeah, please.
Thanks. I really enjoyed listening to you.
Thank you.
And when you talked about people being invested in their illness and attached to it, and having to take responsibility to do what they can to change as well, I'm wondering, when people don't do that and they stay invested in it, what point does it get to as a healer to say, okay, what I'm doing here is not, there needs to be your engagement with it as well. Are you honest with people in that, or do you also, is there also a case for
Good question.
intelligence of spirit coming through in a healing way to help that person take responsibility so
Yeah.
they continue? I'm just wondering what your experience is with that.
Yeah. First and foremost, we've got to recognise, of course, that people who come in are vulnerable in some degree, shape or form. That they may have tried all other avenues of help and support, and quite possibly may have been failed, as it were, in their eyes by those other avenues. So we as a healer have a responsibility not to add to that, and I wouldn't ever dream of saying to a patient, well, it's all your fault because you've been holding this pattern of thought and you need to kind of change that pattern, and don't bother coming to see me until you do. That's painting the extreme, but I wouldn't ever be as blunt. But what I would be wanting to do in the course of discussion with the person is to plant seeds, is to give encouragement, is to kind of share insights to hopefully help them of their own accord come to that realization that how they are at that time is possibly not helping themselves. But I feel that is very much a responsibility of a responsible healer. I don't feel we should just plug in, as it were, and just blindly hand over. We're a human being, we're a spirit, we have our own power, we have our own intelligence, we have the power of the spirit working through us. We should be using all of that potential to endeavour to help and support that person to that place of understanding where they make that decision for themselves. Yeah.
I wasn't suggesting we'd be blunt.
Oh no. Sometimes you do feel like that, like clip round the ear, come on, get a grip.
Would you ever get to a state with if you're doing regular healing with somebody, would you ever get to a state where you just think, well, do you know what, I've gone as far as I can? Or is that just bringing it down to the me without involving the spirit world? So I'm just thinking about that as I'm saying it.
Yeah. If someone was continually coming in, continually clearly not helping themselves, and I have had experience of that in the past, I would still endeavour to offer myself as that channel for healing. And if I had exhausted all means of trying to plant seeds and to try and cultivate a change, again, it comes down to personal responsibility. If that person, for whatever reason, is either choosing to stay as they are, or just don't have the capacity to be able to come into that realization, my responsibility as a healer is to continue to offer that service and that support. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. As I said, you may, part of you want to kind of stand back from that and say, look, you know,
Yeah.
end of the line, but I don't know if I could.
And how long your patience is.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a wee bit on the short side.
Yeah, yeah. Was there another question? Yeah, Sue.
One more. Have you come across the where people are afraid to be well and the best they can be? Does that make sense to you? Where they're
Yeah.
almost afraid to be, well, I'm that well, I have the energy, I have the light and all this type of thing, and to get out there in the world and live. Have you come across that as well? Have you got anything to say about that?
I have, yes. Not in many instances, but I certainly have experienced that. And as I said, people can become invested in their illness, in their lack of well-being, because at some level it's meeting an inner need. And that inner need may be that the illness is providing a level of comfort, a level of interaction, a level of sympathy, a level of care, a level of love that would otherwise be absent. And as I said, we're creatures of habit, and we fall into patterns and ways of being, not through choice largely, but unconsciously.
You may be hiding as well, hiding from the world.
Yeah, and also, again, I experienced, you know, this personally. There were times on my healing journey where it can seem like doom and gloom. You know, that the light at the end of the tunnel seems like a long way off.
Train coming at you.
Yeah, and it could almost be as easy just to kind of give in to that and just put my feet up and say, well, you know, this is what it is, this is what it is. You know, we're all different. I think it's like the example we've just spoken about there. We can only do what we can do to try and help that person realise the opportunity that they have and encourage them towards that. But if they're not wanting to or not able to for some reason, at the end of the day, it is their life. And, you know, it comes down again to personal responsibility, personal choice. But some people I feel can become so lost that they have lost that sight, as it were, of the potential, the opportunity to be well. And they need love, they need support, they need care, you know, not abandoning them at all. But I'm not suggesting that's easy.
Brilliant. Just very quickly, Leslie Thomas sends her regards.
Oh, lovely. Thank you, Leslie.
Well,
Okay.
David.
No for that.
No, seriously, this is over. Do you know what? Again, bringing back in what I was saying at the opening of the evening. In spiritualism, we've got some wonderful mediums, we've got some other mediums, and we've got some other mediums. We've got very few teachers.
Thank you.
And thank you for tonight. That was perfectly understand. I love your angle as you come in at it. Especially when you're picking up the book about the camera, I'm going, right, okay, where are we going with this then? Brilliant, very thought-provoking, a bit like what you said, one sentence, and it was a bit like a private sitting for me,
Okay.
so thank you.
Right.
I went,
I'll be thinking about that on the way home.
Yeah, all right, I'm listening.
Yeah.
Brilliant evening, thank you
Great.
so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you everybody for coming along. Thank you for those joining us online. Where are we? Our next Wednesday we have a demonstration of mediumship with Carla Hain. So the first Wednesday of the month is awareness, second Wednesday is a dem, third is open circle, fourth is spiritual cafe. So David, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.